We can't hear.
Good morning, everyone. My name's Gould.
Microphone.
Can you hear me? Yes? Yay. The old thumbs up always works, right? So thank you so much for having me here again. You know, it's always a little overwhelming for me to be in a room full of this many big brains because I feel like the imposter turning up to talk about what we know about kids. You know, we have big thoughts on what kids are thinking and big thoughts on what kids are expecting. And I sit and listen to all of you to see what you're going to be delivering to them in the future. So somewhere there's a nice connection between those two pieces. So this morning I'm talking about kids and mobile. Surprise, surprise. But you know, this is such a fascinating time and space for particularly us as content providers to watch what's happening in the mobile space, and we ended up calling this Let's Get Personal. And in hindsight that seemed like a really obvious thing, but when we went into this we didn't understand just quite how personal mobile was. I mean, how many people have a mobile device with them here today? Everybody. How many have 3 mobile devices with them? Yeah. There's probably someone with 5, but I'm not going to ask you. Would anyone mind if I took your mobile device and just look through it?
Yes.
Anyone? You don't mind? You happy for me to look at everything on there? I'll meet you outside later. I think you're the only person that has ever offered to have someone go through their mobile device. My colleagues at Comedy Central did a piece of work with men aged 18 to 49 on understanding mobile devices and how they use content. And they describe them as their lovers. Because they sleep with them, they do everything with them, they get anxious when they're not connected with them. And we kind of heard this before we went into this piece and wanted to understand how kids felt. And without giving away the whole presentation, which I'm just doing right now, it's that these devices represent you, and not just a piece of you. They represent most of you, because there's a lot of different pieces of you tucked away in that device. And that's why we ended up calling this Let's Get Personal. So we went into this piece because our head of Nick.com came to us and said, I just want to understand why kids are taking them out of their pockets. And we kind of looked at him and went, oh, it's a really hard question to answer, but a great project for us to get into. So we wanted to capture a holistic understanding of kids' relationships with mobile technology. And this is the slide that everyone really looks forward to in a research presentation, a methodology piece, so I kept it brief. But we did do a lot of qual and quant around this, looking at in-depth groups, mini groups. We did some amazing online ethnographies and online ideation. Some of the stuff these kids send in is just purely inspiring. We had one girl in California who, we recognised was not representative of the average 8-year-old, but she came home and played with her goats and then posted things to her Tumblr account. So it was just great to see the contrast in her life, and she thought that was nothing unusual in what she was doing. And we went and quantified this with nearly 1,400 kids. It's important to know we talked to 6 to 11-year-olds throughout this piece. So if there are 3 things that you stay focused on and that you walk away with from this, because you can stop listening after this slide, it would be content, communication, and entertainment. They really are the 3 things that are leading what we see as the revolution in mobile and kids. This is the first time that one device has been able to offer these 3 things, and it really is changing every approach that kids have to it. So not only are they rapidly changing the way 6 to 11-year-olds consume content and communicate with others and entertain themselves, but what's fabulous for us to see, and perhaps not as much as our previous speaker would like, but the device is being shaped by the way kids use them. The iTouch was not designed to communicate as well as it does. The kids are working their way around it. They don't care. They don't need a phone if they have an iTouch now. There's really little desire for an iPhone if you have the iTouch, because really all it's adding is the phone component, and they've worked their way around it. The kids' usage patterns of mobile devices are very different from their parents, and it should be, and we revel in that. And I think the important thing is finally we have a mobile device that you can take anywhere you want, but most of the usage for kids is happening at home. So, sweet irony. So what is the Me device? It's a highly personalised experience for them. It's definitely liberating and empowering. It facilitates their personal development, self-expression, and interpersonal relationships. And it's leading all other devices on entertainment, communication, and function. So keep in mind, this was a broad-based mobile study. Anything that had a screen that could be moved easily was included. But it really was these Me devices that stood above everything else because of the functionality. But rather than me tell you about it, this is Lauren, who is 10 years old, giving us a tour of why she likes this device.
Hi, my name is Zori, and I'm here to tell you why I like the iPhone and how. Okay, so the first thing why I like the iPhone is because it's good and it's portable. It's small. It's basically like a computer, but smaller, and you can touch screen it. That's what I like. It's more effects when you touch screen it with the games and everything. I do a lot of texting, free texting, because this phone has free texting on it. I usually do that with my cousins and friends. I text them. And sometimes I do Yahoo Messenger with my mom and dad. I'm really interested. I usually love looking at the different times in Hawaii and everything, with the clock, the time clock with everything. And I use the camera a lot because it's good. It's like, it seems like it's really HD and the focus is good. And also the iPod, we download a lot of music on it so we can listen to it when we're like on the road or something. And yeah, we sometimes use Skype, which is basically like Tiny Chat. You can look through the camera part right here. And you can Skype with somebody else and you can see them through another screen. You can see their face and you can talk with them. And yeah. And also I usually like going to the App Store and looking up the free 25 top games, and I usually download those.
She went on for about 5 minutes, and then she went on to explain how she had all her stuff on her dad's phone and her mom's phone, so when she lost power she had 2 backups ready to go. This was an in-home ethnography where we asked the parents to be the ethnographers, so her mum had asked her if she could put her stuff on her phone. No. That was not possible to have the trading go either way. I thought it was also interesting that she thought Skype was like Tiny Chat. I think Skype might have something to say about that. But again, it's a kid's perspective that makes it all the more special. So let's get into some numbers and talk about what's really going on with ownership and acquisition. We always have a moment on parents, and somehow I always tell you that they're conflicted, and they're conflicted about giving their kids mobile devices. There's many reasons they're getting these devices. It's for safety, it's as a gift or reward, to do homework on, as a hand-me-down, and also to learn responsibility. They seem really clear ideas of why you might give your child a mobile device. But parents also have worries. They think their kids may not be responsible enough. They worry about the money, if the initial purchase is the end of the spend or just the beginning of the spend. They worry about spoiling their kids, and they worry about limiting screen time. For those of you who heard the play piece last year, parents were looking for a rule book on how to navigate this, and they're still looking for a rule book on how to navigate screen time, because this is not something that they can look back to their own experience as a child and replicate. They have no experience with kids and the number of screens they have access to. So despite the fact that they worry, what we're seeing is that they're buying them anyway. So we went and quantified, and this was last year. We've just come out of field with some updated numbers for this year, and I really can't wait to see them. So we looked at across all of these devices, whether they were owned or shared, or even just had access to. So we see that, sorry, let me just go back a second. So if you look at our lovely pink DS there, 83% of kids 6 to 11 said they've ever used a DS, compared to 31% saying they've ever used an iPad. I think we need to, clarify ever used. When we spoke to a lot of kids who were saying, yeah, I've used an iPad, it's totally awesome. They were saying, well, whose iPad do you use? Oh, I just go to the Apple store. I use it there. So please note some perhaps overclaiming. I don't doubt that they have touched one. I don't doubt them. But even within those 31%, a lot of those will have been in a store that have been using these screens. So there are some big differences in terms of ever used them. And if we left it here, we could have just said that all we need to talk about is the DS because that's what everyone has access to. But then when we looked at who has their own, 65% of kids have their own DS, 15% have their own iPod Touch, 3% have their own iPad. And then we asked how many had access to one in the home. So it wasn't just that one was in the home, they had to have access to it in the home. And that's when the iPod Touch jumps up, another 24% have access to one in the home. And same thing with the iPad. So given that the holiday season has passed since these numbers were collected, I can only assume a huge uptick in these numbers, and it will only continue to be a screen collecting household. We're seeing that most households with kids have, the range of 7 to 10 screens for the family to use. And then we asked them to estimate how much they're using this. Now, this is a tough thing. No one can really answer this question very well. So what we're really looking for is not the absolute numbers, but the relativity to each device in this space. So DS was being used 48 minutes a day on average. iPhone, 21 minutes, generally because it's not yours and you have much less access to it. The iPod Touch is almost matching the DS at 42 minutes, and same thing with the iPad. So once you have them, you're using them. What are they using them for? Guess what? Playing games. Doesn't matter what the device, the number one thing they're doing is playing games. Unless you have a cell phone, which you would call people with. Makes sense, right? They're also taking pictures and listening to music and visiting websites, much more likely on the iPad space. And finally, they're using video, should they have access to it. So the beautiful thing about mobile devices is that you can use them everywhere. You can take them with you. My favourite part of this slide is number 10, where we left it blank because we thought that was the most boring adult place that you could go, is nowhere. That was often a description of, those other boring adult places that you get taken. We've all been there, right? But you really can use these absolutely anywhere, and they are yours for that moment of enjoyment. That's why often a time spent using is a really hard thing to imagine. Because if you pulled it out of your pocket 15 times in one day, it may feel like you've been on it for an hour, but it may in fact just be 20 minutes. But it's been a really impactful 20 minutes, especially if you're at that number 10 place. But what we saw is, although they can use them everywhere, by far the number one place is in home. The number of pictures we got of kids not just using them in home, but of kids having created almost a bunker for themselves in home. So they truly are, not only is this a personalised screen, they're creating a personal space for themselves. Blankets over their head, huddled up in a corner, dark as can be, personal experience, personal space. Nothing can get between me and my experience in this space. So that seems to be their most ideal space. I think it's really easy to see a 6-year-old with a device like this and think that they're really intelligent. But I think it's important to remember that they're still 6 and they're still learning to read and they're still learning to write and they're learning all of those things that 6-year-olds learn. And what we really wanted to point out is that ages and stages still matter. Device access doesn't make you better and stronger. It just means you'll use it in a way that's appropriate for you and what you're capable of. So we've split this up by task and and by age, and somewhat by boy and girl, although that mattered much less in this piece than the actual ages did. And a moment on gender differences, which normally we could spend weeks talking about. In this case, there were very subtle differences in this device usage. Now, that's not the case that we find in most of the other tech work that we do. But when it came to mobile devices, there were very, very similar responses from boys and girls across all ages in this space. If anything, girls will veer earlier and stronger to communicating in social life with these devices, and boys into more competitive space, but that's not new news for anyone to hear. But it surprised us the whole way through how similar the responses were to these devices. And when it came to the activities that they were doing, the entertainment activities were clearly leading the way. So it was about playing games, taking pictures, listening to music, recording and watching video, and visiting websites. And what we saw for these kids is that communication was definitely transforming these devices for them. It was moving them on from a machine you played a game on to a multimedia machine, to something that you couldn't live without, to something that changed your access to everything. And it became, very quickly, as old devices were being replaced with new devices, the entertainment hub. You heard Lauren talk about how she liked checking the time, I think she said, in Hawaii and other places. She was not alone in wanting to check this stuff. So our comment here was, who knew that utility was so useful? And it clearly is useful. And there's a quote here from one of the ethnographies where the son was with his family, and he was, I think, 11 years old. And they were on a day trip in San Francisco, so they really didn't know where they were going. And they were a little lost. So he and the dad got together and looked up the maps and didn't tell anyone that they looked it up. Just acted like they knew what was going on. But it's more than just useful, because every kid that we spoke to loved checking the weather and the time and the date all around the world. It was just, oh, let's go have a look and see what's happening in Paris now. It was that idea of connection and control to such a basic utility that drew them to this. They put them in control. They didn't have to ask anyone. They didn't have to type any words in. They didn't have to spell Hawaii. They could just tap the screen and there it was. So the idea of utility and fun that can really be brought together, I don't think many of you will spend much time looking at the world clock or the weather maps thinking it was that much fun, but perhaps you will next time. So when it comes to content, perhaps it's a new approach that is coming through. And what we saw very clearly was that TV remained the content king because it was seen as the biggest supplier of quality content, but they're expecting it everywhere. So let's just hear from them.
Red, Dino, and Gummy Bear. Mostly the kinds that my sister watches.
And what sorts of videos does your sister watch?
All they have there is iCarly, so I usually watch that with my sister.
And do you like iCarly?
Sort of.
Do you ever watch iCarly on the iPad?
No,
And why not?
because I don't know how to spell iCarly of the videos.
Oh, okay. So, do you only find videos that you know how to spell?
Yeah.
Do you watch any other TV shows on the iPad? Like maybe your mom does them for you?
She helped me type in gummy, and I know how to type in bear. I watch Netflix on it.
You watch Netflix on Well, that's a really good point. Is watching Netflix on the iPad, is that different than TV, or is it the same as TV? And how is it different?
Because you watch it on an iPod.
Most of them are the free downloads from the iTunes.
Okay.
So there's like Phineas and Ferb, iCarly, I don't know what else is on there.
So Lauren, who you saw that did not watch her favourite show on the iPad because she didn't know how to spell it, is a great example. Just because you have access doesn't mean you know how to spell yet. We also had a lot of frustration from kids telling us that it was really annoying having to watch their favourite shows in 3 parts, which took us a little minute to work out. Like, oh, you mean on YouTube? Yeah, it's really annoying how they put them up there in 3 parts. There was no sense that the brand was not associated with the show anymore. That was Nickelodeon's fault that we were putting shows up there in 3 parts and making it hard for them. So the expectation is that their content is going to be wherever they are, and there is little room for forgiving anyone who will not be wherever they are, because that's just expected of all of them. I still feel sorry for the little boy who just watches whatever his big sister is. It's, it's a few months on now, maybe she's reluctant to give him his own space. So the idea of mobile video is incredibly appealing. It gives you access to your favourite shows and videos, and in a way that you're in control for the very first time. We've long talked about kids living in an on-demand world, and I think in the last 5 years that has just exploded, and they truly are in this on-demand world. There's definitely strong competition for content, but kids don't see it that way. They will just go wherever they can get it. They don't see it as a competition at all. So we wanted to look at, when it came to content, what screen size meant, and I'll use this phrase again, but I may as well start now. Everything's better on the iPad when it comes to content. So they're watching more of everything if you have access to an iPad. If you do not have access to an iPad, then it's perfectly fine whatever screen you can get it on. So let's move on from content into gaming and what that approach could look like. Now again, this was done last year, so things may have changed. But what we saw very clearly is that the most popular games for adults were also the most popular games for kids. And that was across the board, no matter what the device. And often the shared games were the ones that were really the ones that were most popular. So we really wanted to dig deep and see what was going on on each of these devices. So what we saw across all devices is that they have 24 apps, but they're only using about 6 of them once a week or more. There was a real difference between the iPad versus other screens. Just the bigger screen led to more experimentation. What we can see with the age piece, though, is that although games was number 1 for both 6 to 8 and 9 to 11s, it was clearly number 1 for the 6 to 8s. It's a really lovely entry point into that space. And that those 9 to 11s are still using it for games more than anything else, but adding in other pieces. When we looked at the average number of games on each device, we were looking at about 13 games, but only 2 of them were getting played on an average day. Again, the number of games on the iPad and the iPod Touch were much higher, but the number of games played per day were not. The Android games we really struggled with because kids were struggling with it from a functional perspective. They found it very difficult to navigate. So anyone who had access to an Android in the house really didn't use it that much. And you can tell by the number of games that were on there that it was much more of an adult device than a kid-based device. And with the different game systems like a DS, you're generally into one game at a time and you'll work through that game and go through it. So what we saw in terms of types of games that were played most frequently on mobile devices, there was one answer. We like it when that happens. So it was arcade, 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 and arcade. Now, that doesn't mean that the answer to all these devices is to make arcade games. It means that right now, what's working for kids is the arcade games. There was a clear difference. PSP meant action, and DS meant adventure. So there was clear differences across the different screens. And what we saw with iDevices is that they are absolutely a multi-genre gaming device. The first time we've seen this. So we've put up here, I think we got the font small enough for everyone to read. That's a skill of mine. What we did was looked at PSP versus DS and the different game genres that were being played. In that we split boys versus girls, mainly because we could find so few girls who told us they played PSP. So PSP was really being driven by action and racing and shooting, whereas DS was life and style, adventure, and virtual worlds. And then when we looked at iDevice, not only were they multi-genre gaming devices, but you can look at the similarities in the lists. Although the boys and girls have cleverly switched out music and dance for action games between gender. So, paid versus free. This is a whole topic in itself, no, I won't spend too long on it. But what we clearly saw was that it was device dependent. If you can get something free, why would you pay for it? Would be the answer on here. And if anything is worth paying for, it's much more likely it's worth paying for on an iPad because you have a bigger screen. So what we saw is that iDevice users are looking for and finding free game downloads. It's encouraged, it's the system, it's how it works, it's how they scroll through. And for iDevice users, that's the primary source of game content. It means you don't have to ask anyone's permission. We were in one household where one boy was the youngest of 4 kids, and he was the only boy in the house. And he and his family had set up a system where if he wanted access to a game that he had to pay for, his sister was his keeper, so his kind of second oldest sister was his keeper, because Mum really didn't want to be asked about every single game that he wanted to download and pay for. And so what would happen is he would go to his sister would check out the game or whatever it was, and if she thought it was okay, he would give her $1 and she would download it for him. Now what no one in the family had told him is that this system was really just ripping him off, because all the games were going to Dad's credit card, so it was like his sister's processing fee. And Mum and Dad knew about it, but they loved it because he never came to them and asked them for stuff. So they were happy for her to profit off their youngest child so he could get the game. So it's a complicated world out there for $1 for a game. It may seem easy, but it's not. And one day we'll work out what happened. So, I mean, that's a simple example. It seems so easy to work out how to pay for a game, but it can get that complicated, and it generally is. I mean, there aren't many households that allow kids to know their password. So, hence why free is just so much easier. Kids are definitely satisfied with more rather than fewer. When it comes to that space. So they're mostly satisfied with those free or light versions that they're getting. So they'll play them, they'll get bored, and they'll move on. Some of them have up to 100 apps on their device at one time, just to have that many. Just to scroll through them and keep looking for more and more. And when they finish it and get bored, they just move on. But there are some things that are clearly worth paying for. This depends on who in the household you ask, but these are the 3 things. Educational content, TV shows and movies, and we heard again and again about classic games and also game shows. Anything with family participation is really being driven. So, what we also saw is, although they're happy with this play for a while and the disposable gaming model that we call it, it's kind of what's been offered to them. So that's what they're working with. So right now, what's happening is that they're approaching iDevice games in a similar manner that they approach online gaming, disposable. And the style of game lends itself to this, so they have low expectations. And then the game developers in iTunes perpetuate this because they're the games that are working, so let's keep making more of them. So there has to be opportunity there for them to look at other options to deliver. But, is there a second generation of gameplay that looks more like the DS and PSP gaming experience? Because it's not that the want for that kind of play is gone, it's just that it's not on that screen right now. Okay, creativity. I need to hurry up. Alright. So, I'll be creative in my creativity session. Creativity, you've heard me say before, is fundamental. And should be celebrated and encouraged in everyone's day, but especially in a kid's day. And in digital and real life, any opportunity to be creative empowers kids. There are so many fun ways to be creative in this space. Sometimes it's our job to tell parents how important it is, that this is fun and shareable and interesting, but being creative is incredibly important. Digital photography absolutely drives the appeal of a mobile device after gaming, that it's one of the key things that you have access to. I mean, no longer do you have to count up how much each shot is because you can't afford to get the film processed at the end of it, or you have your roll of film waiting. You can just take 300 pictures until you get one that you like. And a moment on silly apps, because there are so many of them, and I think not even talked about that much, but it's fun to be silly with silly apps, and it really is a moment to explore and just let go. And 30% of kids tell us they use silly apps a lot or really a lot on their devices. You know, they're memorable, they're compelling, they're social currency. It's really fun to be in that silly space. I will breeze through this because I've said it before, but here are the numbers to back it up. Everything is better on an iPad. The tablets are absolutely changing the mobile environment. The iPad and iPhone lead for app usage. iPad users are the heaviest consumers of mobile video content. It is the shared family device. iPad game genres, there's no one genre. They love everything that they can get on that device. And iPad users are much more willing to pay for content than any other screen. We did want to address the mobile web. And this is what we came back with. What are you talking about? They don't know what the difference is between an app and the mobile web, and they don't care. To be clear, if it's a square on the screen, then it must be an app. That's it. But what we did see is that the mobile web experience right now is incredibly poor. It's very disappointing to kids, and they don't go back. So unless it improves a lot, they're not going to go there. They're not going to spend a lot of time there. It's really not a compelling environment for them at all. So here we are, almost at the end. Last slide. Normally, when we work in the kid environment, we're telling everyone to just look a few years ahead. Look at some teenagers, look at those just above them to see what they're into, and wait for that behaviour to come down. This is not the case. Those kids were not born into these screens, they were not born into this environment, so therefore they're figuring out as they go just like we are. But those preschoolers that we see, that are truly immersed in this space and are almost being force-fed technology, handed iPhones and touches and iPads from a young age. You've all seen the YouTube clips of the preschooler getting frustrated with the magazine because the pictures don't move. There are 1,000 more out there that get frustrated. The kids who think that the TV's broken because they can't swipe it. My own kids who see my dinosaur of a BlackBerry and touch the screen and say, it's broken, I don't like it. I don't like it either, but that's okay. But what we see is that these preschoolers who are being force-fed technology, who are super immersed, are the space that we should be looking at, because they will be the ones that show us how these devices will truly be used. And that is our look at kids and mobile.
Jane? I know they're hiding. Oh, way in the back.
Just a pragmatic question. Is this absolutely... Oh, I think...
My knees are wearing out.
Hi, thank you for a fabulous presentation. And I'm wondering if this information is available anywhere in the form of a report or...
You know, we don't generally let it be available like that. But, you know, I'm sure they're always going to look at right.
Thank you.
Okay. Any on your side? Oh, right back here.
I guess just a point of information, how do the demographics line up with these various observations? I mean, I assume you got demographics.
It's a really good question, and one thing I did breeze over from a qualitative perspective, we deliberately recruited very high-end tech houses, not necessarily high-end socioeconomic houses, but they had to have an overabundance of tech because that's what we wanted to see to understand the usage. And then when we quantified, we made sure we had a very clear nationally representative sample of households. And what we have seen across the board is that tech is in every house. It's there. And we were really only needing to make sure there was a mobile device that a kid had access to in the house, and that is not a big benchmark to jump over.
Okay, so, do you see any, you didn't mention anything about the Kindle Fire or the Nook?
So the Kindle Fire had not launched when this came out. We did have e-readers in there, but we got so little response from kids about it that there just wasn't enough of a usable sample for us to report back on. So that's another one that we have included in this next round of numbers that we're doing, and I'm assuming, given the sales, that there'll be perhaps a readable sample there, but it was a very low sample.
I have a quick question about e-commerce and with families. We've been hearing that a lot of parents are setting rules for their kids. You're not allowed to buy anything on a mobile device unless it's free. And you addressed that a little bit, but it seems like you're learning a little bit something different than I've heard. Can you talk about that a little more?
The horrible answer that I have for this is it depends on the household, and we're yet to be able to divide that up in a better way. Households with older children in them tend to have easier rules to get around because there are more enablers in the house, and parents have bigger battles than $1 on iTunes to deal with. So it really does depend on parental style and also the age of the eldest child in the household. There are many workarounds, but we saw very, very few households where kids just had free reign access to do whatever they wanted. Most of that was, some of that was about money, but it was also about control and being a good parent and knowing what was going on.
Right, a wonderful presentation. Did you come up against any parental feeling about books and reading? You know, we hear about parents that don't want their young children reading books. Did that come up? I know it was only a year ago.
Yeah, I mean, certainly we heard parents struggling with balancing screen time and wanting to do the right thing. So some parents who had kids who were not happy readers were using these devices to get them into stories, and then hoping to migrate them into traditional books. And others were just balancing that screen time, either using it as a reward or having just clear, hard and fast rules. And you know, some households just let it be whatever it needed to be, as long as they knew what the kids were doing on that device.
When you listed items that they would pay for, people would pay for, education items came up. So I'm assuming that's the parent driving it. Did you get any sense of what parents consider to be educational stuff that they're willing to spend $1 or $2 on?
Sure. You know, it was actually a bit of both, parent and kid in the educational space, because kids aren't stupid and they know if they sell it as an educational item, the parents are not likely to say yes. So, you know, that sell was definitely going on and being heard and believed in the household. I think the educational piece for parents was much easier for them to define in a preschool space, because they felt on top of what that was, and it became much looser once the kids were in grade school and out of preschool as to what was deemed educational. Many parents were putting content in an educational piece, because if my kid likes Dora as a preschooler, and now she's in grade school and I can get Dora content on this device that might encourage her to read, then I'm going to be very happy with that. So it became an interesting and open conversation once your kids were in grade school.
Yeah, I have a question about the time period over which you did this study. Can you just clarify that?
Sure. So we certainly spent a good 6 weeks in field qualitatively with that, and we then quantified probably 4 weeks after that, because there was so much to get through.
Was it in November, December?
Oh, I'm sorry, yeah. So the study was completed by June of last year, and that's why we really want to update the numbers. We feel like the motivations haven't shifted, but access has. So, as I said, those numbers just haven't given us now.
I'd just like to make a comment about, one of the slides you mentioned Android. During that period of time, Android was sort of going through its own crisis with changes in the operating system. And now that we've moved to ice cream sandwich, it's a completely different environment, so it would be very interesting to see if we repeat this, what the results look like, relative to Android and.
Yeah, I agree. I can't wait to see how some of these numbers have shifted.
My question is regarding branding, and how important is it for a brand to be recognizable versus something that someone creates and a child has never seen it before?
Important to a kid or important to the brand?
To
us, nothing is more important to it. So there is a lot of ways to answer that question. There is great value in discovery for all of us, in that sense of I found something that is new and exciting and uncharted. So that is thrilling and exciting and has its place. So something that is seemingly unbranded is exciting. What's also overwhelming for kids in this space is the amount of choice they have. And without being able to articulate it, they are looking for some sense of curation, for some sense of, oh, well, if X has done this, then I'm going to like this, or I'm not going to be embarrassed to tell my friends at school that I'm playing this, because then there's the social currency piece of what you downloaded. So there may be things you downloaded that you're never going to tell anyone about, and there are those things that you can't wait to tell people about because it's already been given a social seal of approval. So there is some complex layering, I think, that goes on, but generally for the social piece, the branding piece is very important.
Okay, thank you.